Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhood. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate the path forward. Welcome to another episode of Emerging Biotech Leaders. I am your host, Ramin Farhood. Joining me today is Meaghan Powers, Senior Director of Clinical Operations at SSI Strategy, bringing over 2 decades of hands-on experience in pharmaceutical and biotech clinical operations, from early development to global execution. She has led organizations through critical inflection points in development, from study design and vendor oversight to large-scale program delivery and operational scaling. Today's conversation with Meaghan will focus on some of the key topics that we discussed with Sharon Arnold in another episode that we did in clinical operations, and we'll continue having those insights, hearing Meaghan's perspectives and from the client perspective, and also from a consulting perspective as well. Meaghan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here and look forward to this conversation.
So do I. Let's just start with your journey. What led you into clinical operations and currently at SSI and the role that you have? And if you can take us through that.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to fall into clinical operations right out of college. It's kind of a crazy story. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my degree, and my mom, of all people, sent me to a job fair at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute right here in Boston, Massachusetts. And I went to this job fair and I happened to meet my future boss, and she took a chance on someone who had no idea what a clinical protocol was, but was willing to let me try. And I started my journey as a clinical research coordinator in a basement of Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, working on adult myeloid leukemia clinical trials. And since my years at the Farber, I've worked at small biotech, large pharma, and medical device companies. So really kind of spanning the range over the last 2 decades. And I've spent the last 8 years of my career in consulting. And, I really, truly love the problem solving that accompanies consulting in the clinical operations space. And now I'm here at SSI, and it's truly a joy.
Yeah. Amazing. Tell us a little bit. So you have worked with a range of biotech organizations and big pharma too. What are some of the misconceptions in clinical operations? What are some of the biggest maybe misunderstanding or misconceptions founders or the CEOs have about clinical operations, just in general? What's the theme that comes across?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because when we are talking to various CROs or CEOs or C-suite members or head ofs, there's this check the box mentality that comes around clinical operations. And my experience with chatting with these individuals is that we just sit in a space where it's just this check the box all day, going through a list to make sure that all of our tasks are being done. And what I've learned by partnering early on with these C-suite members or head of roles is that you can really demonstrate how much strategy goes into the planning and the execution, and then really level up and remind them the creative ways that clinical operations has to really think and pivot around moving timelines, adjusting to regulations, working cross-functionally to achieve corporate goals. And it's like, if we're just living in a silo, checking off boxes, how are we ever going to learn how to de-risk a program, right? And again, it goes back to my experience in consulting. And what I love the most about it is solving problems. And that is when you jump in to the clinical operations space, it's what you spend your whole days doing. You're looking at a trial, you're looking at a program, you're looking at the whole landscape of a clinical trial and how those pieces work together. And I think when you're sitting at a higher CEO level, they're fortunate enough that ClinOps gets to deliver this beautiful product at the end of the day. But there's just so much thinking and pivoting and strategy that goes in from the very beginning, or even portfolio planning, clin dev, if you will.
Yeah. No, it's been my experience too that sometimes there's a shortfall of thinking that once the protocol is approved and you're ready to execute, your job is kind of done. You just wait that the timeline of the study, and then you pick up the data and you go filing, right? And it doesn't work quite that way, right? You still have to bring that science to a reality in your clinical trials and collect the data and pull all that together and come for submission. How do CEOs or C-suite leaders will be able to kind of think like that, to bring in clinical operations earlier on? As far as a strategic partner, we are not even talking about a whole fully functional group, but how does one go by thinking that way? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, it's really getting in. And the more that I've partnered with these companies, especially these small biotechs who come to us really early on with the larger questions of, I have this molecule that I think can work and I need your help, right? And those are the folks that are the most influential and actually end up seeing the most success, because they're willing to accept kind of, let's partner together, all functions. And I'm not even saying ClinOps. Like, we need to bring in a lot of these functions really early on, involve them in the writing of the protocol, involve them in the strategy of your program. What is protocol phase 1 going to look like? What's first in human going to look like? And let's build that out from the beginning. So when we hit those inflection points, we've already prepared for what comes next, right? And that includes, you know, especially with these smaller biotechs, the who's going to do the work. We get a lot of, we as in consultants, consulting firms get a lot of, how do I hire for these people? You know, what am I looking for?
How do you do that? How do you even decide? How do you even decide to scale?
Yeah, it's a great.
Is it after phase 2? Is it between phase 2 and phase 3? Is it? How do you even start thinking about when and how do I scale for the clinical operation capabilities?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And that in-source, outsource challenge, it spans from actually small, scrappy biotechs all the way through large pharma, believe it or not, right? And it's per GCP and a lot of these updated regs that are really putting focus on sponsors retaining oversight responsibility, right? So, and that's where I see a lot of these smaller companies slip up, because it's really easy to just farm everything out to a CRO and kind of dust your hands of the operations because someone else is taking care of it. But it is really crucial to have someone on the sponsor side, whether that be a full-time employee, whether that be a consultant or a contractor, you know, and then we start breaking it down where we have activities. And these are conversations I've had with so many clients where maybe site monitoring or a general CRA, that's okay to outsource, right? But what we want to do is we want to make sure that there's strong oversight mechanisms in place to make sure that there's someone on the sponsor side that really has skin in the game. And then, you know, outsourcing maybe a database build or general data management, that's a common choice for small biotechs. Whereas, you know, roles that have high control, high contact, high risk, such as clinical strategy, vendor management and oversight, data strategy. And that's really where we shine at SSI, right? Because we're brought in by these small companies to provide that strategic guidance and those things that you really want to keep control over. And we act as a member of the team. We become part of the company versus someone who's just going to come in, do the work, and go out. And in my experience, I've partnered with these folks to say, okay, let me get in here, help you with the strategy. And then when it's time to hire someone, I help you hire and bring in the right role. And then I back out and leave you in a good spot.
Right. Tell me a little bit, Meaghan, about this strategy you're talking about. So maybe even an experience that you've had when we're talking about clinical operations strategy, what is that? What does that really entail? What does that really mean? Tell us a little bit, because even in the name of operations, you're constantly thinking execution arm of the clinical development, which is true. You have the
Right.
study, and clinical operations, gets it done,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's not really, as you mentioned earlier, it's not just checking the box and say, okay, now that we got everything, we just hand it over to whether it's internal clinical operations or external or a hybrid, right? Your job is not really done. Tell us about that strategy. What is that thought partnership that you're talking about? What does that mean? What value would clinical operation will bring in earlier on in engagement with the CEO and the C-suite? What do they get out of it?
Well, what they're going to get out of it is that look forward approach. Instead of sitting, in the where are we now, it's really easy to get caught up in the moment activities of a clinical trial instead of looking forward. And what I've done before is really taken my experience and done some of this CEO coaching where it's let's look down the line and we're going to look at process, we're going to look at governance, we're going to look at documents, and we're going to look at people to make sure all of those things are in place, not just for the now, but for what are we looking at when the protocol gets moving? What are we looking to get out of that phase 1 trial in terms of data? Who are the partners? What are each of the people bringing to the table? And then once we get to that first inflection point, what's the goal then? Right? And again, we're looking at who's going to do the work, the people. What's the process around the work? What's the governance strategy? Who's overseeing all of this work that's being done? And then what are the documents that are guiding us through this? And that's when you start pulling in all of these other folks. Quality. Do you have the right quality in place? You know what I mean? Like who is making sure that your SOPs that are governing this whole trial, that are governing this whole program, are being followed appropriately. You see what I mean? So it's more than just to check the box. And then when you have all of the people and the process and the governance, how do they all fit together to make the machine work?
It's almost like you're putting the last final finishes on the entire program, right? And that takes a lot of pooling, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different voices together, right? To be able to make sure that we all kind of get across the finish line, basically, right? And connect everything together as well, because it's also highly regulated. So it's not just like you do the study and you're done with the study and your job is finished. Throughout the entire process, you have to make sure that the integrity of the data, the transparency, all the different forms and different things that it has to be followed by, right, with the SOPs and everything else that you mentioned. Because every mistake in any one of those could also delay approval or even jeopardize approval for a treatment for the patients.
Yeah, and that's
well.
where I am currently. With the last few roles that I've had, some experience with trials has been with vendor oversight.
Talk about that a little bit. How does that work? What does that mean?
Yeah, so at a recent client, they had an inspection at one of their sites that did not go well. This was a client where it was a lot of the work was farmed out to the CRO, and it was they were doing most of the work. And there were no signals coming into the sponsor to say that anything was going wrong, right? So it was everyone's just kind of moving along thinking everything is fine. There's an inspection that happens. The inspection reads out, oh, things are really not fine, which then causes the sponsor to start digging in to what are the gaps? And oh my goodness, is this now a global problem? Is it a site problem? Is it a CRA problem? So I got brought into the project to really do monitoring oversight, right? So to really look at what processes were in place for the monitoring of this large trial that's global, identify the gaps, and then close those gaps. And I brought it all the way down to, at the site level, the site coordinator is entering the data. Who's looking at that data and what's governing that? Now who's looking at what the CRA is doing? And how are those issues being escalated to the CRO and then escalated to the sponsor? And what I realized is there were so many cracks in that process along the way that allowed for things to fall through. And so I spent a year kind of just tightening up those screws to making sure that we could demonstrate to regulators that we have control of the oversight of this trial. And that is what I'm talking about earlier, when with these small biotechs where it's just giving everything to a CRO and forgetting that truly we have to, as a sponsor, retain real oversight.
Right. No, you're very right. And it's not even just about the CRO. I think in general, we have a tendency thinking that, we have a project, we sign a contract with a vendor, with an agency, right? And then they'll take everything over and then we're done. They just do the job and then they'll come back, give us the final project and we move on. And it doesn't really work that way, right? You still have to partner with them. You have to work with them. It's just like an extension of your team. It's almost like you hire somebody and you never talk to them again, right? And you don't provide any guidance, any directions, cracks happens all the time, but you want to be on top of it, communicate and say, hey, maybe it will be better to have, regular weekly calls to make sure that we are covering everything. Maybe it's better to do X, Y, and Z. And that takes some effort from the company perspective, right? And that's something that definitely needs to be bringing to attention, I think, of the leadership program, because you're right. Sometimes we think, even not as big as CRO organizations, even if something is small that, you have to write an abstract or a paper or something like that. And we will think that the company will be able just to do it without any oversight. I think it's a big mistake. And I see that over and over and over again. Yep. And then we end up complaining about the partner, but maybe it was us that didn't really have a good oversight of what they were doing, right? So that's been one of my biggest learning as well throughout my experience. So I can definitely relate to that. What would be the advice that you have for emerging biotech companies, CEOs, leadership team, maybe the founder, co-founder? What would you want them to know about clinical operations? How can they use clinical operations today, right, to be more successful or to make sure the probability of success for their treatment is higher?
It's bringing it in early in the process, even earlier than you think you need clinical operations, and really just talking and listening to as many clinical development and clinical operations people that you can. There's so much knowledge out there, and there has been so many advances in the way that clinical operations works over the past decade that we can all learn so much by allowing everyone a seat at that table in the very initial conversations. And I think what ends up happening where we end up getting brought in to kind of fix some things is those very early conversations are happening in silos. And then they tend to pick up speed too fast. And then the next thing you know, you're going and going. And as I mentioned earlier, you're just living in the present because it's so crazy and so busy without an eye towards the future. And if you bring in those partners early on, you might not need someone full time early on to walk with you, but just to be able to start planting those seeds of what you might need 3, 6, 9 months, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, and just have someone to talk to and continue those conversations and be willing to listen and learn, I think is the most important thing.
Right. Being open to a lot of things that you don't know anything about, right? And being open to listening to others that have expertise. You don't have to agree. You don't even have to do what they're telling you to do at all. Right. But just having that mindset that you're willing to listen to, especially areas that you don't know, even the areas that you know, but mostly the areas that you don't even know anything about. And I can imagine as a CEO, as a founder, as a CMO, there's only so many different things you can expert, and it's
Right.
usually a couple of different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you can become an expert at. The rest, you may have some knowledge and opinion, right? But you don't know as well. And I think seeking advice and guidance and listening at least of what the good look like, I think it's a great piece of advice that you're providing. Thank you, Meaghan, for sharing your insights and your knowledge with us. It was great having you on the show today. Thank you very much for coming.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI Strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.